Hi, everybody, and welcome to our session on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the farm animal movement. My name is Aparna, and I love animals like almost everybody here. And I tread the pro-intersectional path at Samayu, where we care about the interconnectedness of animals, people, and the planet, working together to create a just and fair world for all. Now we are all familiar with these terms diversity, equity, and inclusion, or simply DEI. But did you know that recent studies have revealed that DEI is essential in our workplace because they are known to bring about increased productivity, innovation, new opportunities, and higher, faster problem solving. So, in case you're wondering how and why, well, when you have a diverse group, you have people coming from varied gender, ethnicity, race, religion, sexual orientation, age, abilities, cultural background. So with such a diverse background, there is scope for a wider range of perspectives. So when you couple that with an environment in which everybody feels like they're being heard, like they're being celebrated, uh, the output, the results, the solutions that this diverse team generates will be phenomenal. High quality solutions are going to be generated here. So if we understand really that DI can be this effective in our workplace, it will be interesting to learn how the role of DEI in our farm animal movement. Because when we really better understand the connections between injustice to animals and the various forms of social and ecological injustice, we get closer to addressing the the problems the that is encountered, the many challenges, the root cause of the many of the challenges which we encounter in our farm animal movement. So let's learn what we can do, the changes we can bring about at our individual level, at the social level and systems level, so as to bring in more DEI into our farm animal movement. And we are blessed today to have in our midst two very special speakers who are true champions in their respective area of work. Let me introduce to you, without further ado, let me introduce to you our speakers. We have Ellie Nakajima. Hi, Ellie.
Hi,
So,
thank you for
yeah,
having me.
sure. So, Ellie is the, sorry, her full name is Ellie Nakajima. She is the co-founder and director of Animal Alliance Asia, building a movement that's more inclusive, effective, and sustainable in Asia by supporting, training, and mentoring advocates and organizations across Asia and forming a regional coalition. Through Animal Alliance Asia, she launched the Animal Advocacy Conference Asia, the first conference by and for animal justice advocates in Asia. Animal Alliance Asia has also launched the Animal Advocacy Academy in 5 languages. Prior to founding Animal Alliance Asia, Ellie worked for 10 years in filmmaking and media and applied this experience to becoming one of the first Japanese language educational content providers for vegan advocates in Japan. Welcome, Ellie. Welcome. So, our second speaker for the day is Varda Mehrotra. Hi, Varda.
Hi, Aparna.
Hey, so Varda Mehrotra is an animal advocate and movement builder exploring intersectional solutions. She's the co-founder of A Just World and Samayu, both organizations which undertake intersectional work and apply a systems approach for issues surrounding justice and animals. Under her decade-long leadership, FIAPO, India's Federation for Animal Organizations, was recognized as one of the most effective animal charities. She has spearheaded several large scale undercover investigations, campaigns for farmed animals, and was the architect of India's largest plant based advocacy network, Living Free, which has created many animal advocate leaders in the country. So, welcome, Varda. I would like to mention that here that we were actually also looking forward to another speaker today. Her name is Kavita Krishnan. She is an Indian politician and a women's rights activist. Unfortunately, due to an emergency, Kavita could not join us today, but we hope to connect with her soon. So moving forward, let me share with you the format for the session today. We will begin now with the presentations by the speakers, which will the duration will be approximately 15 to 20 minutes, following which we will do a Q&A session. Yeah, it'll be a Q&A round. So attendees, audience, you're requested to please post your questions in the Q&A box. And you can also mention whom you're addressing the question to. And we promise to take up all your questions post the presentations by our speakers. That's it from me for now. Over to you, Ellie.
Thank you so much for your introduction, Aparna, and thank you everyone for having me here today. So yeah, as Aparna introduced me, my name is Ellie, director, founder of Animal Alliance Asia, and today I will be talking about reasons why we need to be putting DEI at the forefront of our work in our movement and how we can do that. Let me start my slides. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
If you can give me, yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, so I will be touching upon like some basics of concept as well. So it could be a bit foundational if you're well informed about DEI already, but I'm hoping that later on in my talk, I'll also be talking about how to implement this into your advocacy or organizational culture. So I hope you'll get something out of my talk. And I'll also be talking about DEI issues from a more international and global perspective, as well as how we can do this better in Asia as well. So why is it important to address DEI issues in our movement in Asia? And just to clarify, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you're here in this room today, I'm pretty sure that you're all familiar with speciesism. And that's probably what brought us all together here today, because we're all fighting against speciesism. And we're all aware of that specific form of oppression. But we need to remember that just because we are sensitized to one form of oppression, it doesn't mean that we see all other forms of oppression. So we need to always keep this in mind when we advocate for animals, non-human animals. And the biggest and most important question we should be asking ourselves is our movement big enough? And I'm pretty sure that we all agree, most of us agree that it's not. It's tiny. Our movement is tiny at the moment. We just desperately need a lot more people joining our movement. So what is hindering our movement to grow? There are so many different reasons, obviously, but lack of DEI is one of the many reasons. So let's look at why that is. So we need more people joining our movement, which means that we need more diverse communities joining our movement from different religious communities, indigenous communities, people of all ages, not just younger generations. We need people of all genders, queer communities, people with different educational or occupational backgrounds, and people with different amounts of income, individuals with neurodivergent individuals, non-neurotypical people. We need all of these different communities, marginalized communities, to be joining our movement. And when we look at this specific research from 2018, I put the link there on my slide. It basically, the finding was that it basically looked at the causes of activists and advocates, why they burn out in the United States in the animal rights movement. And burnout, they found out that 100% of people of color in the United States burn out because of racism, because of systemic inequity, discrimination, and harassment that they experience in our movement. And as I said, it's a US-based research, so it's more of a like an international perspective of how people of color in their country feel that their voices are not being heard. But we can definitely reflect this in our movement in Asia too. And this tells us how important it is to not repeat oppression within our movement in Asia towards different types of minoritized communities to avoid burnout and them dropping out of our movement. People burning out and dropping out of our movement is definitely one of the many reasons why our movement is not growing. So we definitely need a safer space for all. Is our movement safe space for everybody at the moment? Is it a welcoming space for all marginalized and minoritized communities in Asia? We need to ask ourselves, what kind of messaging are we sending out externally? Does it look quite exclusive at the moment to be vegan, to be part of this movement, to live a certain lifestyle called vegan lifestyle? So when we try to tackle these issues, a single issue approach can be quite problematic. So by that, I mean, if we only talk about animal justice and not other forms of oppressions, that could be quite problematic in our movement. Because if we just talk about that, animal justice issues, then it could be seen as we are taking away a spotlight from other injustice, such as food injustice issues in many parts of Asia. So it's best to avoid single issue approach. And so to do that, we really need more local leadership from these communities themselves. And to achieve that, we need to be building solidarity with all types of communities right now. And I'm sure people in the audience know much better about your culture, your countries, much better than me. But just based on some of our research and our conversations through Animal Alliance Asia with advocates in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and East Asia, a lot of the time, for example, slaughterhouse workers in many parts of Asia tend to be from migrant communities or those who have been historically oppressed. So if we keep a single issue lens in our movement, then we end up seeing these people as enemies. But that would be very problematic. We need to start thinking of how to create a safer space for everybody to feel welcomed, so they can join our discussion as well, and we can together create a more compassionate world for non-human animals. So some of the biggest issues that are affecting our DEI spectrum in our, space in our movement are some of these topics that I'm going to talk about. First of all, the term veganism itself, as you all know here, it was coined in the United Kingdom in the 40s. It's an English word. And according to Julia Feliz Brooke, who's an editor of Sanctuary Publishers, they said the fact that it was coined in the UK in itself had cemented its path towards a very single issue approach movement. So at the moment, currently, being vegan or going vegan currently asks for white assimilation at the moment in our movement. And then that's why we're facing a lot of resistance in Asia. A lot of the communities feel very detached from this term veganism. They feel like they have nothing to do with it because it's seen as elitist Western concept. And many people in the West may say something like, oh, it's easy to go vegan. If I can do it, you can do it too. And I used to say something like that too. But we need to ask ourselves, is it really that easy? Aren't we saying that because we have this single issue lens when we're looking at veganism? So talking about food injustice is extremely important because accessibility to kitchen facility, fresh fruit and veg, time to cook your own food, accessibility to internet, recipes, all of these things are privilege that we take for granted, a lot of us. So there's a quote I really like from Lauren O'Neill's from Food Empowerment Project. They said, people ask why we don't have many people of color in our movement. It's offensive to talk about vegan food to people who don't have access to fresh fruit and veg. It's about food injustice. So as you can see, we need to really take initiative as advocates in Asia to start decolonizing veganism as a concept. And we need to start tackling our own internalized racism, internalized white supremacy, to cultivate more local leadership, to start taking more initiative themselves. And we need to decolonize our mindset because colonialism is also about mental domination. And current leadership style that people usually associate with like the leadership figures, a lot of the time it needs assimilation to white Eurocentric mindset, that European white male logical approaches are the most effective. And the colonized ideas and cultures are considered inferior, and we tend to like have lower self-esteem and self-image because of all this internalized racism based on the history of colonialism. So we really need to start tackling that and decolonize ourselves. So let's look at diversity and inclusion in our movement. So from a more international global perspective, I think it's a really good trend. I think there are more awareness around the fact that there are movements outside the US and Europe. So that's a good trend, I think. But we need to know that diversity in itself actually creates nothing. Because the important question is, what do we do with that diversity now we have in our movement? And that's where cultural relativism plays an important role. It's a view that knowledge, truth are not absolute. It's a view that believes that truth and knowledge exist in relation to culture, society, or historical context, and there's no one truth. So we need to start honoring the experience, culture, and perspectives of marginalized groups and communities. Because otherwise, even when we have diversity in our movement, if we don't recognize that, then we might end up tokenizing these individuals and communities. And by tokenization, I mean, even if they're invited into our movement, their ideas are actually not heard or reflected. So inclusion is actually diversity plus intercultural competency. Together, it creates inclusion, real, true inclusion. Because inclusion at the moment, currently, it often still requires white assimilation in our movement. So we need to start centering, valuing, and amplifying the voices and perspectives of marginalized communities a lot more in our movement. And the truly inclusive movement, I think, is where different ideas and approaches can have their place and not just one right approach. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but we're focusing on equity today. So equity is a situation where basically there is enough tools provided to address inequality, where everyone has equal access to opportunities. And in our case, these opportunities could be funding, different resources, and food access, and there could be language barriers to that. For example, a lot of times we are required to understand and speak English to access resources at the moment. And funding is mainly going into more institutionalized organizations at the moment. So obviously when it comes to funding, it's a huge topic. I won't be able to cover all of it, but we need to be more aware of unconscious bias when it comes to funding as well. And I think there's a lot of pressure at the moment to kind of professionalize an organization in order to access funding. And we need to just ask ourselves, like, what does that mean? What does that mean to professionalize an organization? Is that coming from a more Eurocentric Western perspective? So lastly, what kind of strategies can we adopt at our organizations to deal with these issues, to make a safer, welcoming space? And I think a really good place to start is privilege awareness. So we need to know our own privilege to contribute to a truly inclusive movement. And privilege is basically an unearned advantage. It's almost like an immune system that's given to us only because we belong to a certain dominant social group. And with this awareness, then we can start to think about our board representation, for example. Is there lack of cultural diversity in board members? Globally speaking, that would be all white board members, for example, but in your country, maybe think about if you're representing different marginalized communities' voices in your board members. And another thing we could start doing is to celebrate and nurture and welcome different styles of leadership. Because as I said earlier, there's just a common belief at the moment because of internalized racism and white supremacy that there's one type of leadership that we all need to kind of look up to. But we need to start looking at very different styles of leadership that we actually have in our movement already. And we can definitely start building more solidarity with local communities to make more community-driven projects and not like centrally dictated projects. As an organization, we could also definitely start looking at more on awareness around neurodiversity, how we can make our workspace more welcoming for neurodivergent individuals. And we need to also be mindful of things like unpaid internships, because these could be only accessible to people who have financial support. So yeah, these are some of the things that we could start implementing into our operational and projects level at our organizations. That's it for my talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellie. That was such an informative presentation. Thank you so much. So Varda, could you take over from here? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aparna, and thank you so much, Ellie. I'm getting a message that my internet is not too great. So if there is a problem, please do message me, and I'll try switching my internet connection. So I mean, just to sort of like take a take a more intersectional view on DEI issues. Over the last year, I've been working with a nonprofit in India for including animals and nature into mainstream narratives about environment and climate change and public health and social justice issues in India. And the organization is called Samayu, and we have representation from people working on all these issues across various disciplines, within the food systems. In fact, we define Samayu as a movement of people and organizations who care about the interconnectedness of animals, people, and our planet, working together to create a just, fair world of all. And we do that by adopting interdisciplinary approaches and intersectional intersection actions. And when we were looking at establishing this, we really look back the animal liberation work that we had done, lots of us involved in Samayu had done in the last decade in India. And it was really satisfying to see the movement growing across different urban cities. But it was also clear that we had not been able to achieve the mainstream impact that we all want to see in, in different regions and different geographies, especially considering the exponential increase in animal agriculture in the same time period. And the trillions of animals that continue to suffer, and race, gender, class, color, caste, and other such atrocities also continued across the globe and in Asia. And we saw that the representation of these communities in leadership positions remained pitiful, which really clearly showed that the power lines, even within the movement, are largely unchanged. And if we were truly to change the way that marginalized communities, people of color, and animals are treated, we have to adopt different approaches that look at issues from an economic, political, historical, social, culture, and legal lens. And trying to change the existing skewed power dynamics in their favor is not going to happen if we just use one discipline or even multiple disciplines working independently of each other. Which is why DEI is is sort of like is the way for us to get into becoming a more impactful interdisciplinary movement that is really essential for success. It's not just about a DEI smaller conversation. For example, feminism in Asia and globally has benefited predominantly heterosexual, white or upper caste, middle class, able-bodied women. And this is because even as they applied feminist methodology to a wide range of disciplines from land and labor to health and well-being, there hasn't been enough emphasis on interdisciplinary approaches that explore their multiple intersections and reconcile conflicts between them. And we have to really acknowledge that all of us, animals included, exist in a complex, interconnected web of reality that really requires a holistic, interdisciplinary, and systems-level approach to make any meaningful impact for both human and animal rights. And these unequal power structures and the need for systemic approaches to address the DEI issues is really all pervasive in Asian societies. And it gets reflected in also the organizations working for social impact. Organizations that work in the civil society space are not immune to these challenges. And it is a well-documented fact that the pro-animal movement, the animal protection movement, that globally has always largely considered consisted of women activists, and more women are part of animal organizations or are volunteers, and more studies have shown that more women are vegan or vegetarian than men, yet women continue to be underrepresented in the leadership of animal protection organizations across the globe. And there are so many reports of racial and gender-related abuse that have also surfaced in the past few years in the movement. And one can only wonder if this is linked to the lack of women in decision-making positions in the movement. And within the animal movement, the insistence on only focusing on animal rights against other forms of oppression can also lead to issues around gender, race, caste, age, and ability either being brushed under the carpet or really just being given superficial importance, And wherever we've had women leaders, the nuanced leadership that these women have provided is really evidence that we need more women in decision-making spheres across the globe for effective action. And I believe there are really immense benefits for the animal rights movement and the animal protection movement in Asia from addressing these DEI issues and bringing them into mainstream discussions, really making them pivotal for our effective functioning, for the organizations that directly impact the effectiveness of our interventions for animals and ending their exploitation. Prioritizing fighting against one oppression and neglecting other forms of oppression really propagates, the systemic oppression, and that harms the animal protection movement overall. And many people working in the animal protection movement are already familiar and really understand the interlinkages between gender equity and animal rights. But I would still, reiterate some of these points because unfortunately we're still a long way away from establishing these in public consciousness. And in fact, why just gender equity or feminism? All systems of oppression, whether related to gender or class or caste or race or religion, ethnicity, speciesisms, all the isms, all the ideas of otherness are rooted in the same power dynamics of domination and oppression. And they stem from patriarchy and racial context, in the Indian context, caste supremacy. For example, we know that the exploitation of animals based on their reproductive cycles and fertility is similar to what women have to go through. And we often use these narratives in our efforts to educate and raise awareness about animal cruelty on dairy farms and poultry farms. And these parallels between objectifying women's bodies and animal bodies are very evident to us in the animal liberation movement. Taking away a woman's sense of individuality, perceiving them as sex objects, is very similar to the commodification of animals as food. The control over women's bodies that a patriarchal society perpetuates by assigning them stereotypical gender roles is again taking away agency from animals by using their bodies in the current food systems or for entertainment or for clothing or for personal care products. And finally, using metaphors like that liken animals and women, using sexless words with specious roots is an insult to both animals and women in many languages across the world. Catty, chick, bitch, I mean, these are just a few in English that are hugely problematic. And we all know these linkages really well as in the animal liberation movement. And we've, in the movement, we've been able to set aside our own privilege and recognize the atrocities that are meted out to the most marginalized group of animals, farmed animals. And while it's really heartening to see the growth of this movement across the world and in India, we are already seeing fissures and issues that are cropping up within the movement in organizations and between activists. And we have to acknowledge that we are a long way off in acknowledging how many of these isms are deeply entrenched in our day-to-day language and functioning, even within animal protection organizations and the larger farmed animal movement. It is really critical that we recognize this in fighting against one oppression while closing our eyes to others. It's very similar to how often we despair in our own movement when people who love their companion animals treat farmed animals as their food commodities, being blind to the sense of farmed animals, even as they call themselves animal lovers. But all forms of oppression and domination feed on each other, and we must recognize this if we are to create a lasting impact for animal rights. And really, any organization would want to be effective in their functioning and make lasting impact. And I think animal protection organizations can take the lead in powerfully and holistically addressing DEI issues because we are already familiar with the dynamics of marginalization and oppression and the invisibility that animals have to endure. There's a wide variety of literature that's available on the theory and praxis of various DEI measures that can be taken in organizations, especially in fostering a culture where diversity, equity, and inclusion are really integrated into the operational framework and the functioning of the organization. Things like pay parity, respectful behavior, codes of conduct, easy accessibility for complaints committees. These are just some of the measures that organizations can take. But I'd really like to address the question of organizational strategy from a more strategic intersectional lens that I really believe has the power to then percolate down to the last level of organizational functioning. Because first of all, we have to acknowledge the futility of thinking in silos. And let me just use the example of our intersectional work that we've been doing here at SMIU in India. And we were founded last year in October 21, and we dialogued with more than 200 plus organizations and experts and practitioners for reimagining food systems in India. And it was really an exhilarating journey, engaging with them through one-on-one conversations and convenings and white papers and whatnot, and an activator methodology that we devised for facilitating dialogue. And nearly, we have sort of several partners now who are doing commendable work beyond animal protection, looking at the environment, biodiversity, conservation, community engagement, social equity. And together we've agreed on multiple campaigns. And these are organizations that aren't traditionally animal protection organizations, yet they're contributing their time, energy, resource, logistical support, and thought leadership for this sort of joint intersectional work that we are able to undertake. And, our experience has really shown us that applying this interdisciplinary lens helps us arrive at more effective, more holistic solutions while providing access to previously unavailable audiences to talk about animal rights interventions. And this is just the start of our journey. It has been tremendously encouraging to see the openness with which our community, which is made of non-animal people, is receiving this interdisciplinary approach to include animals in nature in mainstream narratives. And this is why we're able to attract a wider group of individuals and organizations on a common platform and agreeing to work together on common issues against systemic domination and oppression of not just animals, but also women, marginalized communities, and nature. And this has tremendous promise to holistic solutions that can really emerge so we can take effective on-ground actions. I really believe that the time is right for us now to unite across multiple movements against oppression, against domination, taking intersectional action, even as we adopt interdisciplinary frameworks to find empowering grassroots solutions. And this is really the next wave of change that both human rights and animal liberation movements have to embrace. It's particularly relevant considering that it will help us make these movements more inclusive, more diverse, and more respectful. And not just speciesism, but all other isms are deplorable everywhere, including amongst those advocating for animals and human rights. And I think we need more women in leadership positions in the animal liberation movement. We also need to evolve an ability to embrace interdisciplinary approaches and move to truly intersectional functioning in our organizations. And I'm really using the word women to represent the entire LGBTQIA plus spectrum when I say that more women in leadership positions and also conscious move towards intersectionality. It will make the animal movement stronger, more inclusive, more diverse. It will broaden our audiences. It will build more acceptability, and it attracts so many allies in our effort to promote animal interests. And just as I come to an end, I also want to use an example of the role of women in the climate movement, for example, as something for us to learn from. And it's really heartening to see that the climate change activism led by women is acknowledging the importance of including animal agriculture in narratives that establishes it as one of the leading causes of climate change. And many such climate change activists are adopting veganism as a result. And it's now becoming more common to see environmental activists adopting plant-based diets, even if they don't fully transition to veganism. And this is a major intersectional win for both the climate and the animal movement. And it's already led to an increased participation of people from both sides of the movement in advocacy activities and initiatives. And with women forming a majority of this common climate and animal movement while also heading these initiatives, it becomes a great metaphor for the power of intersectional activists in causing positive developments and impact against all systems of oppression that we are fighting against, whether it's gender-based, whether it is climate-based, or whether it is animal-based. And, it's in conclusion, it's really encouraging to see women's participation and leadership in the climate and pro-animal movement, but we need to see many more women joining these causes, leading from the front and causing change for other women so they get access to political decision-making spheres. And we need to really collectively influence and cause widespread government support, to the adoption of holistic DEI and animal policies. So that's all from me, and looking forward to questions, if any, and a discussion with participants. Thank you, Aparna, and thanks, Ellie, for the talk. That was really.
Thanks so much, Varda. Loved your ideas on how to make DEI more impactful on our farm animal movement. So I see some questions coming in. Maybe we can take this up. Okay, so we have one question coming in for Ellie. Ellie, can you talk more about the term vegan as problematic? Are there suggestions for other ways of referring to veganism?
Thank you so much for the question. Yes, this has been a very hot topic within AAA for the past few years, and there's no one clear answer to this. But yes, it has been very problematic, and I think everyone here would know that. In many ways, it is still seen as an English or European concept that's only really for elitist groups of people, and that's kind of probably created by the influencers and celebrities and maybe white advocates, leaders on social media, kind of creating that kind of trend that it is a European concept or American Western concept. And yes, there has been a few really very interesting projects, like in China, for example. There was like a competition to come up with like a new term to address the concept of veganism in their language. And that was very encouraging to see that kind of initiative popping up. And at the same time, there are already like direct translation of the term veganism in some countries, but it is seen as a more of a Buddhist concept. So those who don't identify as Buddhists immediately turn off from that term as well. And yeah, there are like different beliefs within that religion as well. And some people try to avoid onion and garlic, for example, many of you here would know. So there is a bit of confusion around that as well. What does it actually mean? Is it just about religion, health, faith, or is it about animals? And yeah, so it is very complicated. I don't know if the answer is to actually create a new terminology. I don't know how successful it has been since that competition in China. But yeah, I don't know if it's like about the term itself or how we talk about it that we need to decolonize. We could maybe keep using that word, but decolonize the concept itself to a more Asia-suited concept. Yeah, I don't have an answer to this, like one clear answer to this. And I would actually, I don't want to put you on spot, Varda, but I would be interested in like the situation in India as well. Do you have similar problems with this term in India?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think the terms. I think veganism. I think, and you're right. It's not just about the term. I think it's also the concepts. Sort of the whole concept of veganism. Also, I think we lose out. We lose out on the more inherent holistic approach that the Eastern thought provides on the holistic nature of nature and animals, and how it's sort of seen more holistically compared to how it's seen in the global north. So I think in using the word vegan and in using the sort of and by term, it's not just about the word itself, but the whole sort of the whole term, the whole philosophy, the whole concept. And the set of concepts that come with veganism. I think not only is it sort of like not context specific for India and Asia, but I think by not creating our own narrative, we lose out on the strengths that we have, of how animals are viewed in Indian and Asian context, and I think those, especially like I said, the holistic nature of, how we view nature and animals is lost, and I think there's a lot to be leveraged. And maybe one of the things that the Asian movement would want to do, and I'd certainly be interested in participating in that conversation, would be what would be the Asian narrative around veganism? How do we really want to talk about this? And essentially ending the commodification of animals, ending the exploitation of animals, and reimagining our relationship with animals, which is not based on exploitation. How do we really translate that principle of what we right now know as veganism to something that is context specific to Asia?
great. Thanks so much. So we have another question. Varda, maybe you can take this up regarding intersectional work. How do we overcome the perception that animal rights are of less importance than human rights, which when some human rights issues are so very life and death?
Yeah, I think we need to sort of to do two things. Perhaps one is to create a space which sort of where we're able to highlight that we don't need to be put in these positions where we have to choose. We shouldn't have to choose between fighting different forms of oppression and injustice. Preventing one form of injustice does not mean that I have to accept another form of injustice. And I think that's a fundamental respect that we need to start with when we're talking about intersectional action. I mean, if I want to save animals, does not mean that I want the farmer to starve and die. I mean, there has to be alternative livelihood. There has to be a dignified livelihood and the other way around. I mean, access to nutrition does not mean that lots of animals should be killed. So I mean, I think we need to sort of first of all create those. We need to make sure that there is that we don't put ourselves that as stakeholders coming together for intersectional dialogue. We need to come into the room, with the respect and with the commitment to inclusion, and that all interests matter. That we don't have to prioritize and choose between one kind of issue or group of oppressed oppressed group over another. And I think another thing that really needs to be done is to develop some sort of shared language. Because I think lots of times these things fall through because of the lack of a shared language, and that's certainly a challenge that we're also facing in India. With our own community, we are engaging with a lot of stakeholders, but we're still to develop a shared language with them around. What does oppression mean? What does a dignified life mean? What is our long-term sort of model and material future that we can all aspire to, that we can align on? So I think creating a shared language, I think, is also really important for strong intersectional action.
Sure, thanks. Ellie, this one is for you. Can you suggest any resources that can help with privilege awareness training, etc.?
Yes, I don't have it right now, but I would be more than happy to share like what we use for our academy. Can I share that like after this event with the
Sure,
participants somehow? I'll share the
sure,
link with you.
sure.
Yeah,
And
but
no, I was just thinking you were also talking about changing the narrative. You wanted to, maybe you can even talk about it, promote that event here now.
oh, thank you, thank you. Yes, I'll do that right now then. Before that, about the privilege though, like if you, sorry, it's not like the best. I hate when people say just Google it, but if you actually Google like privilege test, you will actually find a lot of different types of tests. And it usually consists of like 10 to 30 different questions about yourself. And you basically score yes or no. And then you end up with some sort of number, how much you scored in terms of privilege out of these questions. And then it doesn't really mean much if you do it by yourself, because you wouldn't know if it's high or low. But if you do it in a group exercise with your colleagues, or yeah, maybe, then you will be able to compare it with each other and say, oh, okay, so like it's always relative, right? Privilege, how much privilege you have, and what kind of dominant social group you belong to, and which disadvantaged groups you belong to. Everyone belongs to both most of the time. So yeah, I would recommend doing something like that as a group. So you kind of become more aware of the privilege you have that others maybe don't. And then after that, you can start to think about how to take advantage and really start utilizing the privilege you have in order to make this space a more welcoming space for others. And one of the things that we started doing at AAA is we started asking our staff members to fill out something called, what do we call it? Personal user manual. So we asked a bunch of questions on that form, and if they're happy to share, if they're not, they don't need to, of course. But it's like basically an opportunity for everybody to just share and put it out there what kind of areas you need more support with, you would appreciate more support with, how people misunderstand you sometimes. So we put these things out there at the very beginning and we check each other's forms. So when we see someone struggling, for example, we know we can offer help. So that way we're trying to facilitate a more supportive environment within AAA. I hope that could be useful for some people. And yes, thank you for this opportunity to promote our next event. So Varda here and I, so Samayu and AAA, are basically organizing a series called Changing the Narrative. And it is all about DEI, actually, in our movement. And the next one is happening on Saturday this week, on the 15th. I'll just paste everything in chat. So we have Dr. Krista Hirama. They will be talking about organizational practices in our movement. So exactly what we've been talking about today, how we can actually make our organization more welcoming. And for we also have Jessica Ava talking about more equitable funding practices in our movement. So that's a huge, very, very important topic. And we would really appreciate if people could come and share your experiences and insights as well. It's a workshop, so you will have an opportunity to discuss your experiences as well. And the registration link is there. So yeah, please register today. Thank you, Aparna.
Sure, Ellie, that sounds great. So this question going out to Varda. Many people are still debating a gap between animal rights and animal welfare. What's your opinion on how we close the gap and unite them to help animals?
You know, I mean, I don't know if this gap needs to be closed. I think any movement can be successful only if it is diverse in its thinking also, and I think that needs to be welcomed. You know, I think there is strength in multiple kinds of strategies that are adopted for animal liberation, I don't think that I think but I think the problem is when the problem arises when there is infighting in the movement, and you know we lose energy that should be directed outwards for change, and instead the energy is directed inwards in infighting. I think that's where the problem arises. I don't think the problem is inherently in having multiple views, you know, towards the goal of animal liberation. You know, I mean, I think it's important to be able to hold space for multiple, you know, respectful space for multiple strategies, to be able to find out ways that even if the long-term goals different, you know, how can we collaborate? How can we at least synchronized, you know, and synergize on short-term goals? How can we find ways to support each other? And how can we have fundamental respect that for each other, that all of us are ultimately here for animal liberation, you know? And I think that's the direction we could be taking. You know, I mean, I think DEI, intersectionality, interdisciplinary thinking is all about holding space for multiple kinds of thinking, and those make us richer. Those tensions enhance and push us forward and push the movement forward. You know, so I think that's inherently not a bad thing to have multiple views, you know, on how we achieve our goals.
Absolutely, wonderful. Maybe we can take one or two more questions. Ellie, this one is for you. In some cultures, societies, exploitation and abuse of animals are still acceptable. Do you think it's a barrier or a challenge to the animal welfare movement? If we respect the culture difference and leave a society, local government to apply changes?
So could you paste the question in chat if possible, please?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because that was quite long and my brain stopped midway.
Don't you worry. Yeah, so there you go.
I don't see it yet. Oh, thank you. Oh, I think that's a different question, maybe about caste.
Would you like me?
Oh,
A minute. Maybe
oh
I.
yes, I got it now. Thank you. Thank
You
you,
did?
Pam.
Sure.
Yes, yes.
I'll
It's
just post
because,
it again. Yeah.
oh yes, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a very difficult question. Thank you. Yes, I am aware of that, and we have been discussing this a lot with advocates on the ground in many different countries in Asia. And I guess we were just talking about this yesterday in Japan, actually, with some activists here. But like turning on someone's compassion is just it's not easy. It's not possible. We don't like dictate someone else's compassion, so that's probably not the best angle to go with. And also, we need to keep in mind what we've been discussing today when we witness exploitation and abuse of animals. We don't want to go in there with like single issue approach mindset and tell people what's wrong and what's right. We really need that. This is exactly why we need local leadership from that community who might have been practicing some form of animal exploitation or abuse, or maybe animal sacrifice. And together we need to find a better solution together. So this is where we need to start building solidarity with these communities, really have meaningful, deep conversations, why that's happening, so that we're not forcing some kind of idea upon them. And for that, we need people who speak these languages, who have grown up in that culture. And this is why we need to cultivate leadership in every community, I believe. Leave society, local government apply changes to. Yeah, I mean, yes, I think that's what I've just said. Yes, thank you. So leave it to the local community. Yes. When it comes to government and policy level changes, I think that's a whole another discussion. And we could be approaching to both areas, maybe. We don't know what works best. I know I have seen that some international pressure has worked in some countries when it comes to policy changes. When the Western world is doing something, some governments in Asia might feel like they have to follow the trend. Yes. And at the same time, we do need like both pressures from inside and outside, I think. And for that reason, I do believe that we need to cultivate local leadership, and we need to start building like a really meaningful relationship and rapport with these communities. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Maybe just one last question, and then we'll wind up. So this one is for Varta. Varta, how did you start the conversations with the 200 plus other communities, groups about working together in a joined up way?
Sure. I think what we did really was to first of all identify areas that could be of common interest. So, so because we were talking about food systems, to really identify organizations that were working in relevant areas of public health, and specifically in public health within AMR or One Health, interested in those sort of approaches, youth groups, environmental groups, because those are the common areas of concern. And really having, we have a brilliant team, and really sort of like having one-to-one conversations with these, with these different stakeholders on what's their area of interest, so not sort of like just sort of saying that, oh, animals matter and putting that there, but really engaging in a real dialogue, and informing ourselves also about the challenges of those groups and of those organizations and of the different people that they are working for, that they represent, whose interests they represent, and really sort of like identifying, in a truly intersectional manner, I think all of us at SMIU truly are, we have to live intersectionality. When we're engaging with people from other organizations, to have these one-to-one dialogues, and then, we take them through a process of taking them through group dialogues and convenings and so on. But the idea is always to make sure that there is there is a lot of listening, and there is a lot of also then slowly integrating the animal, the animal aspect in that listening and in that engagement and in that conversation. So we do a lot of education in these dialogues also, where we would share the reality of animal issues, with all these different stakeholders. But it's really based on a lot of respectful listening and a really, sort of care and concern about how do we really create win-win solutions for animals, people, and the planet.
Sure, great. Thanks so much, Vaida. So I have a request coming in. Yes, we'll do one more question. So this is, let me see. Discussions around ISMs, especially casteism, lead to heated and often confrontational debates in vegan circles in India. So many vegans prefer to keep away from such discussions and focus on animal rights alone. Would you agree with this tactic to keep the peace? This question is coming in from Manisha. Manisha Singh.
I think what happens in these debates and discussions is that animals are weaponized. Animals are weaponized and used as a pawn to talk, for oppression against minorities. I think as animal advocates, if we choose to stay silent, when we're seeing oppression and when clearly animals are being weaponized, in one way we are we are almost agreeing with the use of, with the weaponization of animals, because we're not speaking up against it. We're not saying, we disagree with that. We disagree that animals should not be weaponized and used to oppress minorities, either religious minorities or caste minorities. So I think as intersection animal advocates, we do have a responsibility to speak up and say, not in our name, this is not animal advocacy, because, the animal, especially in India, the animal issue is so colored now with all the different kinds of layers around casteism, around oppression against religious minorities, that I think we really need, and I think animal advocates do have a responsibility to not let animals be weaponized, which is what is happening right now. So I think we do need to speak up. I think keeping the peace with whom, like when we say we want to keep the peace with whom, I mean, we are only here to represent interests of of those who are oppressed, and that's animal, people, and planet. So who are we really? Are we keeping the peace with the oppressors? So who are we really keeping peace with? So we really need to, I think, make sure and be vocal about oppression in whatever form it exists, because it doesn't help animals and it doesn't help people. It's bad for oppression against minorities, and it's bad because the narrative is perpetuating this idea that it's okay to weaponize animals. So I would not agree with that.
Sure, thanks so much. Yes. Ellie, would you like to add anything here?
No, thank you.
Sure, that's great. So guys, you are amazing. I'm so grateful that you're investing time to discuss DEI and the farm animal movement, because when we engage in this kind of a conversation, what we're really doing is we are challenging the unspoken biases. We are ensuring that the marginalized are given a voice, and we are making our farm animal movement far more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And the audience, I'm so thankful to you for joining in today. We hope you found the session useful. So that's it from us for now. Bye, and thanks so much.
Thank you.